Welcome back, capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today, we are looking back at yet another insane week of college football. It was week 13 of the 2024 college football season. The season's coming to a close, but it has been one of the best that I've seen in my lifetime. So be sure to subscribe and turn notifications on to get the latest news and analysis the rest of the way. And without further ado, let's jump into our predictions. Now, if you have not heard, we are potentially giving away $100 very soon to one of our subscribers. If you want a chance at winning, be sure to follow us on our social medias. The links to those will be in the description below as always, but that's only if we don't correctly predict over 75% of the college football games correctly this year. As I speak, this week's games will be popping up on your screen, and we ended up predicting a pretty mediocre 44 of the 65 total games correctly this week, which brings us to 569 of 769 correct predictions on the year for a winning percentage of 74%. We are still just under that 75% threshold. So if you want a shot at that $100, it's a pretty good chance at this point. Be sure to follow us on our social medias. Like we said, the links to those will be in the description. And now let's revisit our big impact matchups from this week, starting with SMU at Virginia. We thought SMU would win this one 31-20, and they end up taking this one 33-7. This was about the performance we expected from SMU. They absolutely trounced the Cavaliers in this one, and it really wasn't even close. The Mustangs held Virginia to 173 total yards, 2.6 yards per play, and 3 of 15 on third down. And they did turn the ball over twice, but that defense was playing so well that it didn't even matter. And on top of that, Kevin Jennings also had an amazing day, and he is your player of the game in this one. He threw for 25 of 33 passing, 323 yards, 2 touchdowns, and interception, and carried the ball an additional 3 times for another touchdown. Next, let's look at Ole Miss at Florida. We thought Ole Miss would take this one 34-24, and Florida ends up winning 24-17, and it's official, folks. The Gators are back. Before this matchup, we said we were proud of Florida for taking down LSU last week, but that we thought Ole Miss was a couple notches above the Tigers. But what we didn't account for was that Florida is also a notch or two above where they were to start the year. They've been phenomenal as of late, and that's in no small part due to DJ Lagway coming up huge for them the past few weeks. He has looked great as their quarterback one, and we expect him to be one of the best in the sport eventually. But the MVP of this game is the Florida defense as a whole. They sacked Jackson Dart 4 times, got tackles behind the line of scrimmage 9 times, and forced 2 picks, both by your player of the game, defensive back Bryce Thornton. He had 5 tackles in this one with those 2 game-changing interceptions. He is your player of the game in this one. And now let's look at BYU at Arizona State. We thought Arizona State would pull out the W here 27-26. They end up winning 28-23. And what a statement win this is for Arizona State. We know Kenny Dillingham wasn't happy with the theatrics at the end of this one, but he's for sure happy with the outcome. And we're happy for Cam Scatabo, who bounced back this week from injury and who is your player of the game. He had 28 carries, 147 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He was the key factor in this matchup for the Sun Devils. This game was looking very even for the most part outside of that run game, which set them apart in this game. And now let's look at Penn State at Minnesota. We thought Penn State would win this one 28-20, and they end up winning 26-25. This game ended up being a lot closer than we thought because Penn State felt like it was sleepwalking through this one at times. They had a pretty inefficient day, couldn't really take advantage of Minnesota's mistakes, and had a really hard time staying on the field. Actually went 1 of 11 on third down, not very good at all. But at the end of the day, it is Penn State. The defense gave the offense a couple opportunities, and really that made all the difference in the end. And your player of the game in this one is going to be the quarterback, Drew Aller. He threw 21 of 28 passing for 244 yards and a touchdown, and he also carried the ball 9 times for an additional 8 yards and another touchdown. They get the W here, but a bit concerning looking forward to the postseason for the Nittany Lions. And next, let's look at Alabama at Oklahoma. We thought Alabama would win by 20, with the final score being 37-17, and Oklahoma actually beats Alabama by 21 points. What else is there to say about this one? I mean, Oklahoma really just flipped the script on us here, or in reality, it was Alabama that really flipped the script on themselves. It was a piss poor showing from the Crimson Tide. This is easily their worst performance in recent memory that I can think of, honestly rivaling the game versus Louisiana Monroe in 2007 in our opinion. The Tide disintegrates in this one, and the Sooners do just enough to capitalize, and for what it's worth, they didn't play bad in this one, especially your player of the game, Jackson Arnold. He goes 9 of 11 passing for 68 yards and then carried the ball 25 times for 131 yards in this one. And now let's look at Notre Dame versus Army. We thought Notre Dame would win this one 24-21, and they end up winning 49-14. The Irish put the hammer on our nation's Army, which is grounds for invasion in my opinion. People will try and tell you that Notre Dame is ranked too high, and I will be the first to tell you those people are dumb. Notre Dame has been on an entirely new level this season, and they showed it here by averaging nearly 10 yards per play and dropping almost 300 rushing yards on a very stout and capable Army front. And their offense wasn't even on the field for that long, 20 minutes to Army's 40 to be exact, and in that 20 minutes they only saw 5 third downs and scored 49 points. And if that doesn't spell utter domination to you, I'm not sure what will convince you, other than possibly pointing out your player of the game, running back Jeremiah Love, who carried the ball 7 times for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns, and also had an additional 1 reception for 6 yards and a touchdown. All of that on 8 total touches. Truly wild stuff to behold. Jeremiah Love, you may spell your first name weird, but have a day. And now let's look at your game of the week from this past week. Indiana at Ohio State, number 5 versus number 2, and we thought Ohio State would win this one 31-23. They end up winning 38-15. And other than that first Hoosier drive, it was all Buckeye in this one. And we gotta ask the question, who looks better than Ohio State right now? We had a few big upsets this week that have effectively knocked a couple big dogs out, and with Oregon struggling last week, should the Buckeyes be the number 1 team in football? Stick around later to find out in this episode. But like we said earlier, this was the Ohio State show, and we said beforehand that Ohio State's defense would be the key factor in this game, and it felt like they were the only factor. They outgained Indiana in total yards 316-151, averaged 5.7 yards per play to India's 2.6. They sacked Rourke 5 times and stopped runners short of the line of scrimmage 8 times in this one. Your player of the game is going to come on that side of the football. It's the linebacker Cody Simon, who had 4 tackles in this one, 2.5 sacks, and a forced fumble for the Buckeyes. And now let's look at your team and player of the week this week. As always, you guys vote on these. Be sure to hit the community tab after each week and vote on who you think the team and player of the week should be. This week, it was the Oklahoma Sooners, who, like we said, beat the 7th ranked Alabama Crimson Tide 24-3. And in this one, they outrushed Alabama 257-70 yards, 5.2 yards per play to Alabama's 4.1, and were +2 in the turnover battle. Great day for Oklahoma, and they're now bowl eligible, something that wasn't guaranteed this year, especially after some of those down weeks versus Tennessee, South Carolina, Texas. Those types of games did not give us hope that they would see the postseason at all, but they pull out the win here, and now they're bowl eligible, so shout out to the Oklahoma Sooners. And for your player of the week, it comes out of the Big 12. It's Kansas running back Devin Neal. Kansas actually gets the win over the Buffaloes, and it was absolutely in no small part due to Devin Neal's day. He had 37 carries for 207 yards and 3 touchdowns. Crazy numbers there. And it gets even crazier when I tell you he had 4 additional receptions for 80 yards and another touchdown in this one. One of the best days I think we've seen this year. Great all-around performance for Kansas, and especially for their running back, Devin Neal. And now let's move on to our Let's Talk About It segment. And this week we want to highlight one game in specific that we might consider game of the year potential. We talked about Arizona State, we talked about Florida, we talked about Oklahoma over Kalen DeBoer's Crimson Tide, but there's one more we want to go over just for some added flavor in this one. Out of Jordan-Hare Stadium, the place that before this week on game day Nick Saban himself said was haunted, and he was right. In a 4 overtime thriller, the Tigers of Auburn beat the previously 15th ranked Texas A&M Aggies, who were 2nd in the SEC, mind you, and man, what a game it was. Auburn got off to a hot start. Texas A&M came screaming back. Looked like A&M was going to pull away, and then Auburn takes it right back, forces overtime, and they had over 900 yards of total offense, over 80 points scored, as you can see, nearly 160 total plays called. Both quarterbacks throw for over 300 yards and multiple touchdowns, and Auburn ends up winning 43-41. It was one for the ages, not a game you see too often. If you did not watch it, be sure to at least watch the highlights. It was insane. And now all that's standing between Auburn and a bowl game are those pesky elephants in Tuscaloosa. And now let's move on into our week 14 top 25, starting with the teams that dropped out. And for the first time this season, we have none. We're staying airtight here despite a few upsets. And to kick off our top 25, we have Colorado after a pretty awful loss to Kansas, a team fighting and scratching for a postseason berth. Not a great week for the Buffs, but they'll hang on to our top 25 by a thread, followed by Memphis, who was on a bye. They move up one spot. And then it's Army also dropping down to 6 spots after receiving BTA from Notre Dame this week. It was their first loss of the year, so we'll cut them a little bit of slack. They won't fall all the way out of our top 25, but they do fall to 23, followed by Syracuse, who jumps up one spot, and they scrape together a 7-point W over a pretty decent UConn team. Still not the greatest performance, but a win is a win. And speaking of wins, next we have UNLV, who jumps up 3 spots, who gets another good win over San Jose State this week, and then by BYU dropping 4 spots to 20, who will only drop 4 spots this week because it was only their second loss, and it was to a pretty solid Arizona State team who, spoiler alert, you will see on this list. Next, we have Texas A&M also dropping 6 spots after another rough loss to an Auburn team who, in all fairness, did look pretty great in this one, but regardless, they dropped big this week. And then it's Iowa State jumping up 4 spots to 18 after their win over Utah. Not a good win, but a lot of teams ahead of them lose worse than they win, obviously, so they'll jump up this week, followed by Tulane, who also jumps up 4 spots to 17, who was on a bye but might only be a Boise State loss away from the college football playoff, unlike our next team, Alabama, who we have dropping 8 spots. You just can't lose by 20 to Oklahoma. Plain and simple, this is a bad loss. We think it should absolutely keep them out of the playoff, even if they beat Auburn next week. Terrible, terrible game by the Tide. Very dissimilar to Arizona State. Here they are. We said they'd be here, and they're here at 15, who jumps up 5 spots. And they get the biggest win of their season at home over BYU. They're your new top Big 12 team, followed by South Carolina jumping up 4 spots to 14. And we know they played Wofford, but they are on the cusp of the playoff at 8-3 in our opinion. They're a win away from jumping our next team, Ole Miss, who beat them earlier in the year, but who dropped 6 spots because they lose to Florida. And then Clemson at 12, who also jumps up 3 spots. That Palmetto Bowl between Clemson and South Carolina next week could potentially end up sending either of these teams to the playoff or out of the playoff, and we're as ready as ever to see it. But unfortunately for the Tigers, we have 2 more ACC teams ahead of them this week, in Miami at 11, who moves up 1 spot after their win over Wake Forest. And then it's SMU jumping 4 spots to 10, who we have jumping the Hurricanes this week because, I mean, why not? Better conference record, same overall record, better team probably, all around. Maybe not the better player. Cam Ward's probably the best quarterback in football, but probably the better team overall. That logic adds up to us. But next we have Tennessee jumping up 3 spots to number 9, who has just been a roller coaster this year. I mean, I feel like they've fallen out of and jumped back into our top 10 more times than I can count this year, followed by Boise State, who jumps up 2 spots to number 8, who we have jumping after a pretty scary win last week at Wyoming, where Ashton Jeanty actually went down with an injury early, but ended up coming back in and having another great game. And they sit at 10-1, just like our next team, Indiana. Don't know why I pronounced it like that, but they're only dropping 2 spots in our opinion to number 7 after their tough loss to Ohio State. And it is what it is. I mean, they're still 10-1. Their only loss is to a top 5 Ohio State team. We won't move them down that far, even though it wasn't a great loss. And after them, we have Penn State sitting still at 6 after a very, very close win against Minnesota. Maybe controversial that we didn't move them up, but we didn't feel comfortable bumping them up after that performance, especially because at 5, we have Georgia jumping all the way up 4 spots. and they have officially secured an SEC title bid following the Texas A&M loss this week. Congratulations to them and to our next team as well. Number 4, Notre Dame, for their big win over Army this week, but they'll stay put at 4, followed by Texas, who beats Kentucky, who's going to have to play Georgia in the SEC title, who they've already lost to this year. And then at 2, we have Ohio State, who gets a huge win over Indiana, but who we do not have moving over Oregon on a bye because they beat Ohio State earlier in the year. And no, we will probably never put a one-loss team over an undefeated team, especially because Oregon does have that head-to-head win. Great win for the Buckeyes this week. Oregon's on a bye week, struggled last week, but they are your number 1 team for the 6th straight week this week. And last, let's look at Todd's red carpet. This is going to be our good buddy Todd's projected outlook on the playoff picture each week, and after the sun has set on a catastrophic week 13 of the 2024 college football season, this is what the playoff bracket will look like according to Todd. And there are some big changes with just 1 week to go in the 2024 regular season. Be sure to pause and soak it all in, or go down to our social media pages and check it out. Links to those will be in the description. Let us know what you think, and as always, thank you for watching. Be sure to tune in later this week for our week 13 preview and predictions, and be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed this video. And as always, we will see you in the next one.